But first, everyone will have seen the heartbreaking footage of the bushfires in California, but not everyone will have taken the time to read about the widespread criticism of California's leadership, which some have argued have made the fires more difficult to contain. Now, one marketing clip, which has gone viral, does a pretty good job of summarising the obsession with identity politics, which has infected leadership of critical emergency services.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
This woman is a Los Angeles Fire Department diversity chief, and she is making the argument that it is your fault if you are trapped in a burning building and a female firefighter isn't strong enough to save you. Now, that's pretty disgusting and reprehensible commentary. It isn't very inclusive either, as people with disabilities can be caught in fires, and we know the fires are so fast-moving in California that simply anyone can get caught out. And this is what their marketing team proudly published as well. It's their culture, an aggressive victim-blaming culture of identity politics above all. And of course, this rubbish was called out by many people, including Elon Musk, which prompted media organisations like the Sydney Morning Herald to criticise him. Reporter Bianca Hall writes, "Disinformation reigns as bushfires devastate California." And speaking about Musk, she alleged diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI, investments and hiring processes, he has repeatedly said, have caused deaths that could otherwise have been avoided if more white men were fighting the fires. Now, he actually never explicitly said that. And if he had, she would have quoted directly what he said. She just verbaled him. And it is false, and it's an effort to strawman a broader and legitimate argument about these insane priorities and racist hiring practices at some emergency services. In fact, the reporting was so unhinged that one of their own writers called it out. In a tweet which has since been deleted, SMH columnist Parnell McGuinness took aim at her own masthead for basically misrepresenting Musk's position. She said that credible outlets make themselves less credible by making up misinformation about misinformation. Musk suggested that fire services should not preference DEI hires over people who could do the job, a subtle but important difference to what is implied here. Now, either these reporters, such as Bianca Hall, are so stupid that they don't understand the argument, or they simply don't care. And for the record, if it is the latter, then that is a real case of disinformation. Well, joining me on the show this week is the Australians Darren Davidson and Sky News contributor Louise Roberts. Louise, what we saw in that clip from this very senior fire chief telling people that if they're the ones trapped in the building, well, they've done the wrong thing. They're the ones who've got themselves in the wrong spot. I find it astonishing that journalists are somehow defending that and also trying to make the argument that it's almost immoral to point out that that's just clearly wrong.
Well, I do wonder what Christine Larson's sort of position is. Is she somehow also, by extension, blaming the good people of Los Angeles for the current fire situation, the people who've lost their homes and the businesses that burnt to the ground and the absolute devastation, the multi-billion dollars of damage that's been caused? I do find that when Parnell sort of called out her own paper for whitewashing the issue and sort of somehow suggesting that Musk had made this comment saying there should be more white men being hired rather than more diverse candidates, people have really recognised DEI as being a major factor in why these fires are not under control and why the priority has been for training firefighters and not enough water in the fire hydrants. I mean, from my point of view, it's a campaign, a 3-year campaign within that fire department, which should be stopped now. Yeah,
and I think Darren, let's bring you in here because there's clearly a cultural element in the fire department as well, which is important to talk about. Because it's not like journalists went sorting through archive footage and this was leaked from their internal servers, internal training material. This was published by the fire service as part of this identity politics propaganda push that they do when they're all trying to be pro-identity politics. They've published this commentary out there. It's come back to bite them, obviously. It was an older video, but it goes to show how they think about it.
It does. I actually lived in the area from 2021 until 2022 where the fires are happening right now. My son was born there, so I had a very good exposure to the way that local resources are managed. And I think a lot of the commentary and some of the commentary you've referenced is just a clear attempt to distract from the failure of state and local government to contain fires that often accompany the Santa Ana fires, which are a part of the climate in that region. Look, no question, human activity impacts climate, but you often have dry seasons following wet seasons. That's very, very common. That's been happening in California for hundreds of years. What's actually happened here is that Gavin Newsom and the Democrats have mismanaged local resources. They've underinvested in water storage and land management. If you look at the federal budget, the state budget for California coming up, they've slashed resource management for Cal Fire by half, which is a huge reduction, and that's why these fires are happening. It's very, very sad. As someone that lived there, it's actually devastating to see what's happening to those people's homes and those communities which are actually devastated. I really do hope, and we see a change in how those local resources are managed and how the state is led by Gavin Newsom, who is he's a disaster. And we've seen this around the US in recent years, and it's one of the reasons why Trump's back in the White House, which is that a lot of these cities have been really, really grossly mismanaged at a state and local level in terms of resourcing.
Yeah, well said. Well, let's move on, because as we go to air tonight, the world was still waiting for confirmation of a ceasefire deal in Gaza, which would see the release of hostages. Now, it is expected to be formalised this weekend, and the good news has led to both sides of politics taking credit. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump claimed credit for the deal because both parties were involved. And for the most part, the media coverage around this was fair. The New York Times called it an extraordinary act of collaboration between outgoing and incoming presidents. Biden and Trump defy the history of animosity to seal Gaza ceasefire. The two presidents directed their advisors to work together to push Israel and Hamas over the line for an agreement to halt the fighting that has ravaged Gaza and release hostages who have been held there for 15 months. And Biden himself explained this to reporters pretty clearly at the press conference.
This deal was developed and negotiated under my administration, but its terms will be implemented, for the most part, by the next administration. In these past few days, we've been speaking as one team.
But just 1 minute after those comments, Biden went to turn around and he was baited by a reporter.
Thank you.
Who gets credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
Media pundits and so-called experts will continue debating who should be praised for the deal if it goes ahead. But over at MSNBC, the conspiracy started to fester. It could not possibly be that Trump did something good. Host Joy Reid had a different theory.
And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it no secret that he prefers Trump and wanted to deliver him a win. The Washington Post reported that Israel would gift something to Trump, but it was believed to be a deal on Lebanon.
This is supposed to be a legitimate news service, and Joy Reid is just making up theories that the entire war being halted was because of a secret deal between Israel and Trump. Well, Louise, those kind of conspiracy theories get very close to the Jews are controlling the media and they're controlling the government. My problem with this, there's nothing of substance that she possibly could have other than reports that they've had conversations. Well, of course they're going to have conversations. He's the incoming president of the United States. They're going to be talking. But she's actually gone to air alleging that he has waited. So it's, by the way, the onus is then on Israel. It's all Hamas was coming to the table, but Israel was waiting, and Netanyahu was waiting to give Trump a good present for him to start. It's so absurd.
It's absurd. It's actually offensive to Jewish people, somehow allowing hostages to remain in those tunnels and suffer while a little tidy deal was done to make Trump look good once he gets into the White House. And also the way that Biden sort of throws that nasty comment over his shoulder, you're joking. Even in a situation where he's leaving the Oval Office, he cannot give Trump any credit for pushing this deal. In fact, it was Trump's Middle Eastern envoy who actually got Benjamin Netanyahu to actually, agree to the deal. So there was no harm in Biden actually saying, yes, it was truly a bipartisan approach and thank you, Mr. Trump, for your help. But he couldn't bring himself to do it, which says everything to me about his administration and leaning towards a very left conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and I would have liked to see both leaders actually, Darren, let's bring you in. I would have liked to see both leaders probably praise the other person, because there were two parties involved in that, if it does go ahead, and it will be a wholly good thing for everyone involved. The other element to this story, though, is you've got these organisations. The left is very quick to talk about misinformation and regulating against this, fake news, etc. They publish this absolute nonsensical, conspiratorial, it's just conjecture about something they think Trump might have done. I think it's going to get much worse as he takes office. What do you make of it in this situation?
I agree. Biden's touting his record on foreign policy as he leaves office, but it's a really questionable track record over the last 4 years. I mean, on Israel itself, he opposed nearly every single military decision that Israel made, and it's really only Israel that's established a deterrence against Iran in that region. I think the greatest failure of Biden's foreign policy is that so many adversaries around the world have kind of moved in to fill this vacuum. We had so many conflicts around the world during Biden's term. I find it really hard to buy into this attempt to kind of paint this picture of a really strong foreign policy record. I think it's quite the opposite, in fact, particularly in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And the other element to this is, if it was all Biden, as his supporters are suggesting, then why didn't he do it 6 months ago? Why has it coincidentally taken up until he's about to take office?
Interestingly, though, that the New York Post did a great coverage of this, and they actually got some quotes sort of off the record from Biden's admin, who said that Trump's influence was very important to actually securing this as well. So while everyone around him acknowledges it, he still, wants to sort of take full credit for something, as you say, he could have done 6 months ago and ended the suffering of many hostages.
Yeah, and in Biden's scripted statement, he does actually reach out and say, this was a team effort, so that there was a bit of bipartisan
there was,
commentary
but his body
around
language
that.
when he leaves the lectern, I think, says it all.
Because he was told, he doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know where he is.
I don't think it's authentic. He's been told to be magnanimous to Mr. Trump, but in his heart, no.
There's a script and then there's what he actually wants to say. Yeah. But look, let's move on, because Mark Zuckerberg has finally dismantled the corrupt and biased fact-checking system which polices his platforms in the United States. He spent hours explaining the decision in a podcast with Joe Rogan.
We tried to put in place a system that would deal with it. And early on tried to basically make it so that it was really limited. We're like, all right, we're just going to have this system where there's these third-party fact checkers and they can check the worst of the worst stuff, right? So things that are very clear hoaxes, that there's it's not like we're not parsing speech about whether something is slightly true or slightly false, like Earth is flat, things like that, right? So that was sort of the original intent. We put in place the system and it just sort of veered from there. I think to some degree, it's because some of the people whose job is to do fact-checking, a lot of their industry is focused on political fact-checking. So they just kind of veered in that direction. And we kept on trying to basically get it to be what we had originally intended, which is just, it's not, the point isn't to judge people's opinions. It's to provide this layer to kind of help fact check some of the stuff that seems the most extreme, but it just, it was just never accepted by people broadly. I think people just felt like the fact checkers were too biased. Not necessarily even so much in what they ruled, although sometimes I think people would disagree with that. A lot of the time, it was just what types of things they chose to even go and fact check in the first place.
Zuckerberg also shed light on how political censorship had become. He revealed when he pushed back against Joe Biden's team, his company started getting investigated.
These people from the Biden administration would call up our team and scream at them and curse. And it's like, these documents it's all kind of out there.
Oh, did you record any of those phone calls?
I don't think we but I think
I want to listen.
I mean, there are emails, the emails are published. It's all kind of out there. And And they're like, and basically it just got to this point where we were like, no, we're not gonna take down things that are true. That's ridiculous.
Now, it is all very well for Zuckerberg to say that his fact-checking system is corrupt and biased, so he is fixing it in America. But what about for us here in Australia? We've been locked in very public disagreements with activist fact-checkers here in Australia, which have been paid astonishing amounts of money by Zuckerberg to censor journalism. And these activists will still have the power to censor your thoughts at the upcoming election in a few months. We asked Meta about how it could possibly justify keeping the Australian industry going and allowing RMIT back onto Facebook's payroll, and they gave us this statement. No changes to Meta's third-party fact-checking program in Australia will happen before the federal election. We are beginning with rolling out community notes in the US. Building this type of community takes time, and we will continue to improve it over the course of the year before considering expansion to other countries. In addition, before rolling out any changes to our fact-checking program outside the US, we will carefully consider our legal and regulatory obligations in each country, including Australia. RMIT's Lookout is a Meta third-party fact-checker in Australia. RMIT have undergone some changes, including management, and their renewal application has been approved by the IFCN. On their new website, they detail a code of practice, which includes commitment to impartiality and fairness, etc., etc. We all know that they never did that. Let's bring the panel back in. They did have a code of conduct, RMIT. They didn't adhere to it, which is why basically we got them shut down and Russell Skelton was sacked. That's the change of management we're talking about. But it's still the same core team that's running it. They've been allowed back there into Facebook. They're going to be able to censor content during the federal election. So, Louise, my problem with this, it's how can these two things be true? You've got the CEO of a company saying, this system's flawed. It's so flawed that we lost control of it. It's become political. In that podcast and other sections we didn't play, they discussed it being paramount to election interference as well. And the example given was, the Hunter Biden laptop, which they obviously took off Facebook. How many more votes would that have impacted? During the referendum, we were prevented from reporting about the length of the Uluru document by this group. Now, this impacts how people vote because, one, there is an argument that it's misinformation. Wasn't misinformation, they were wrong. They were too uneducated to understand the argument. That there was a bundle of documents. It just was what it was, whether they like it or not. These people, how could, on one hand, this scheme not be fit for practice in the US, but don't worry about those people in backwater Australia and their elections?
It's offensive, isn't it? Because you would think that with an election coming up and the fact they've mentioned electoral interference before and it's been an issue for them in their fact checkers, I don't see why they can't just stop the service right now. I mean, this is a digital platform. So why does it take so long to, roll it out and test it in America and see about, how that works and fixing the bugs?
I think he is very scared of Trump.
Yeah.
Because I think that if he can get hauled before some congressional inquiry and all these emails, it's all very well for him to say, oh, the Biden administration made us do it. Well, you did it.
Well, they did it.
You're complaining about it now that there's a new administration, right? It would be very easy for them to get hauled over the coals.
Yeah, I think you're right there as well. But I think it's bad news for young voters, perhaps young people who are voting for the first time in a federal election and are going to platforms like Facebook and Instagram to get their election coverage and to work out what the candidates stand for. That's going to be corrupted and skewed and,
Darren, let's bring you in.
Bad news.
What do you make of Mark Zuckerberg's, just more broadly, the moves to get rid of it in the US, but the inconsistency that we still have to deal with this scheme that he says is bad?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's consistent with Facebook's behaviour and actions in Australia over many, many years now. They just show a complete disregard for values and Australian law. And we've seen that with the bargaining enterprise code that was introduced a couple of years ago and their actions over that, which is still yet to be resolved. I find it really amusing that Mark Zuckerberg goes on the Rogan podcast and seems astonished and outraged that a politician or his staff would call up and complain and scream at them. And, this is a daily occupational hazard for journalists. As you know, Jack, we get that all day long. from politicians and contacts and other stakeholders in the publishing business, and we just get on with it, and that's part of the job. And it's just another example of why, Facebook is a publishing platform. It's the world's largest publishing platform, but it's not fit for purpose.
I mean, we're one of the most heavily regulated media environments in the world. ACMA oversees us from a broadcasting point of view. If we ever make a mistake, we've got corrections policies and everything. I don't need some 22-year-old Indigenous rights activist who's wormed their way into a university to tell me and my team whether a document is 6 pages or 1 page. But that's what was happening, and that's the flaw with this whole thing. He's admitted it's not fit for purpose, but we're still using it. It's crazy to me.